Welcome to the first proper episode of the Peak Nutrition Podcast. I say proper episode because it's the first one that I'm actually talking about something nutrition related. Now, I think we are starting off with a banger here. So today we are running through the 5 biggest mistakes that I see people make when dieting. I think with the best of intentions, so many people set off on the wrong foot because they just picked the wrong strategy. So today I wanted to just run through a few areas that I think most commonly trip people up. So I'm going to go through a mistake and then maybe a better way that you can handle that situation. So starting off, mistake number 1 is focusing on what should I cut out. Now, I completely understand this. Nutrition seems to go hand in hand with restriction. The diet culture is all about good foods, bad foods. What can you cut out? You shouldn't eat this. I completely get it. However, I just don't think it's a good attitude. Firstly, because what happens if I tell you that you can't eat chocolate? What are you probably thinking about right now? Let's just say it's chocolate to help the story run through. But it's true, isn't it? That if you're told not to think about something, you often want it more. It's this like forbidden fruit effect. And it ties into something that we call the binge restrict cycle, which is where you make a food off limits, you avoid it, you restrict it. And then after a little while, you start craving it. Eventually your willpower breaks and then you go on a big binge. And your response to that is restricting it even more. Hence why it's called this binge restrict cycle. And even if you step back from that, we probably can't avoid these foods forever. So you may as well have learned to deal with them. So what's the solution here? Well, I like to get my clients focusing on positive things that they can add to their diet. Can they add more vegetables? Can they increase their protein intake, whole grains? Can they cook more meals from scratch? Try new recipes? And these are what we call approach goals, as opposed to the avoidance goals, like cutting something out. And we're much more likely to be able to stick to approach goals because it's just a more positive outlook. And actually, if we can include plenty of these positive choices, we often reduce those less desirable things as a byproduct anyway. So we're achieving the same outcome, but just with a much more positive outlook. Mistake number 2 is exercising to burn calories. I think with smartwatches, calorie trackers, everything's become like this numbers game. I'm going to run you through a bit of maths here, so this could turn a few people off. But to lose a kilogram of fat, that's roughly about a 7,500 calorie deficit you'd have to create. Now, if we think of the idea that the average run or a gym session could be around about 300-400 mark, that's a lot of gym sessions you got to do to create that 7,500 calories. If you're just a normal person training 3 or 4 times a week, that's realistically, that's not going to happen. Beyond this, it actually creates a really poor relationship with exercise. If you're viewing exercise just as a calorie output, you're probably not going to enjoy it. It's almost like a punishment. So what's a better way we can deal with this? Well, we do need to create this calorie deficit, but what we eat and our day-to-day movement actually have a much greater impact on this. So we need to manage our food choices and we need to increase our day-to-day activity. And then we can view exercise through the lens of getting fitter, getting stronger, having fun with your mates, maybe even the competitive side of things, and create the calorie deficit elsewhere. This is exactly what was happening with my client, Mark. Now, Mark was training CrossFit pretty much every day. He was getting fitter, he was getting stronger, but he just couldn't shift the weight. And it was only once we got his daily activity higher that he started to notice improvements. So we set Mark a daily walk on his lunch break. We set him regular walk intervals at the office. And he managed to lose 12 kilos in just over 10 weeks. And he's almost perfectly maintained that since we stopped working together. Mistake number 3. So this is perfectionism, or just more generally having very high standards. Now, on the face of it, this seems like a good thing. Aiming for perfect, having high standards. What could be wrong with that? The trouble is that it gets us into this idea that we can't accept any less than perfect, and you've let yourself down if you don't achieve that. And often, if then we're not able to be perfect, we just give up. So it really promotes this all or nothing mindset. Because realistically, things aren't always going to go to plan. You're always going to have that shit day at work, kids kicking off, you forgot your lunch. So we need to be able to adjust and think on our feet and accept not perfect. And just as a bit of an aside, I think even the most elite athletes that you can imagine don't eat a perfect diet. We can get into the argument of whether the perfect diet even exists, but that's probably for another podcast. So what can we do instead? So you need to start lowering your standards. I really like the analogy of viewing your health and fitness habits like a dimmer switch. So obviously with a dimmer switch, you can turn it up and down as opposed to this light switch that's only on or off. Because at different times, we're going to have different amounts of energy to devote to our health and fitness habits. We're almost there now. So mistake number 4 is avoiding social events. I put it to you, does removing yourself from all the things that you enjoy actually enhance your quality of life? Probably not. And for most people, it's not sustainable to avoid social events indefinitely. If you want to thrive in lifestyle, you probably actually need to be able to find ways to include them. You need to find a balance between your fitness goals and your social life. So how can we do this? Well, we need to start managing them and planning for them, making more mindful decisions, considering what's the purpose of the event and what trade-off are you willing to accept in terms of your health and fitness goals. We can start to create a toolkit of different strategies for different social events. I've actually got a copy of this in a PDF, so if you do want access to that, just flip me a message. And then the final mistake is changing too much. Too many changes at once just requires an awful lot of effort, because the way that you currently do things actually serves a purpose. Your current habits are a way of dealing with the demands of your situation and your environment. And to just overthrow these completely, it's going to require an awful lot of effort, because every single change that we make does have a cost. That's mental burden, financial stress, even just extra effort. So if we change lots of things, it's going to require lots of effort. And that could well lead to overwhelm, burnout, giving up. So instead of that, maybe it's time to try the slow and steady approach, making small but consistent changes over time. Within my coaching, I help my clients identify the low-hanging fruit. So these are the changes that can make a meaningful impact, but for a relatively low effort. So that might be things like little food swaps we can do, getting walking more, making sure you get protein at breakfast. And if you can consistently apply these changes, you start to develop confidence, your skills, and then we can really start to compound all the small changes. Because ultimately, my approach is to change as little as necessary to achieve your goal. And this is exactly what we did with my client, Chris. Now, Chris had lost weight in the past, but it just never stayed off. He had always gone very aggressive. He had cut out everything he enjoys, and he had overhauled his lifestyle. But then he'd get to a point where he just couldn't stick with it. He'd give up and then go back to square one. So this time we focused on identifying small changes that he could stick to long term. Now, Chris was an absolute fiend for soft drinks, and he won't let me setting. So one of the small changes we could make was just swap in for Diet Coke. Now, the jury's probably still out on artificial sweeteners. We can't conclusively say the negative impact they might have, but what we do know for sure is that being overweight and excess added sugar are definitely harmful for health. So in this instance, I would argue it's a positive trade-off. So Chris managed to lose almost 8 kilos. He got fitter, but he also remarked at how easy it was. He actually sent me a message when we finished up, and he said he came to me with a goal of being able to be proud of how he looks and how he performs. And he said he's in a brilliant place with that. He's the lightest he's been in years, and he just generally feels a lot better about himself. And with that, we come to the end. So just to recap, the 5 biggest mistakes that I see people make are focusing on what they should cut out. They're exercising to burn calories. They're trying to be perfect. They're avoiding social events, and they're trying to change too much. And these are the exact issues that I'm helping my clients deal with day in, day out. So if you want a bit more guidance and help creating a sustainable diet for you, then just reach out.